Hey, it's Tom here. I'm going to give a quick overview of this AGU poster and hopefully explain some of the more um, complicated parts of the poster to you. So, the problem, let's start over here, box number 1. So subglacial bed forms, these are forms that occur underneath glaciers in between the ice and the substrate. They're composed of till, but they're also can be erosional features, so they can be an imprint on whatever the substrate is. And so there's a whole variety of different forms. There's things called drumlins, which are narrow hills that elongate along with the ice. Rib moraines, Rogan moraines, they're hills that form perpendicular to the ice direction. And megascale glacial lineations are these just incredibly long, can be even up to well over several kilometers long hills that align with the ice direction. So there's a whole bunch of different forms that fall under this umbrella of subglacial bed forms. And so really they're a big enigma. And one of the first striking aspects of these features is they're patterned. So they're regular, they've got similar shape both globally and within fields. And I think what's really interesting about this is the regularity is not a pre-existing thing. It's something that develops with the formation of the features. They're incredibly prevalent for a geomorphology enigma. They cover most of Canada and northern Europe. The processes that form them are pretty unknown. It's very difficult to instrument under a glacier. The consequential, very important modulation on how fast ice moves and importantly how fast glaciers in Antarctica are moving into the ocean and melting and increasing our sea level. And they're really unsolved, and so there hasn't really been a cohesive theory that's been presented that explains how these things form. Makes them pretty exciting. So what did we do? Well, in this paper, we made a model, and so the purpose of this model was to make a model of the core feedbacks. So basically, we're trying to understand what those big mechanisms are. What are the big things that are absolutely necessary to make these features? And by this approach, we're not going to include everything that you could possibly model, but the inclusion of these core mechanisms helps narrow and focus the research, and it also helps us understand, because the model can be a lot simpler than if we tried to include every possible parameter that could possibly be important. So the model space, just a very simple cellular model space, is very common in geomorphology. There's three basic huge mechanisms. First is an amplification mechanism. So there's a positive dependency between downflow, till flux, and ice pressure. So how hard the ice is pressing on the bed, that controls how much downflow, till flux is occurring. And so that's unstable on its own. So it needs these two additional mechanisms. First, you need a lateral till flux mechanism, which moves till from areas of high to low pressure. And there's also this other moderating mechanism here, sediment entrainment. So sediment gets entrained into the bottom of the glacier, gets trucked along stuck in the bottom of the glacier, and then it comes out of the glacier with a basal pressure dependency. So all of these mechanisms have some support in the literature, but I think our contribution is to put these mechanisms together and to do some work probing what the magnitudes of those mechanisms are and what the effects of those mechanisms are on the forms of the features. So we did several simulation suites. The first one, we started with the easy case, which are non-erodible substrates. So this means a substrate that is hard, the glacier cannot erode it, and we just have sediment just forming bed forms on top of this hard, flat surface. So we simulated various sediment depths and ice speeds. By sediment depth, I mean this is the amount of sediment in the model space that the model has to play with to form subglacial bed forms. And the huge finding, I think, just these three pictures here. The top is very low ice speed. It's what's known as Rogan moraines. So very slow ice speed creates Rogan moraines, and as you increase the ice speed, you get more streamlined features. And this second one here is basically drumlins. And then at the bottom, as you increase the ice speed even more and more and more, faster and faster ice speed, you get mega scale glacial lineations. And so this matches what is empirically observed. So areas in ice streams where the ice is moving incredibly fast, you get very elongate mega scale glacial lineation features. So this is really nice to see this in the model because it really matches empirical evidence. And so the other big thing that really controls how these features form is the sediment thickness or the sediment depth, and this is just a measure of how much sediment the feature has to play with. And so this is something that we actually see in aeolian environments where you can dramatically change the pattern of your bedform field just by giving it less sediment, and controls this lateral linking feedback, which is present in Rogan moraines and in conventional dunes. But when you reduce the amount of sediment, the features break apart like bar cans do in real sand dunes and deserts. Our hypothesis is here that drumlins are in effect a bar can type feature. So they don't look like bar cans, but they're that same type of independent bedform, self-sustaining bedform. So we've also been working with erodible substrates. Now, erodible substrates are perhaps the more common and realistic example. Glaciers are obviously incredibly powerful at eroding features, and especially the substrates. So this is a really important extension of our work. So we made a few modifications to the model. The first one is to allow the ice to erode the substrate, and we modeled this as a function of the amount of ice pressure. And so this goes back to the sort of proportion of time the ice is in contact with the bed, and the erosiveness of the ice as a function of how hard it's pressing onto that bed. And so where you erode more, it also releases eroded sediment, and this is one of these important feedbacks. And we also set the sediment balance to be net negative, so sediment's leaving the model space, and this has to be true in these situations because otherwise you would just erode the substrate, fill your model space full of sediment, and that would do that. So what we found here is conventional bedforms, as in our number 3, they tend to mask the pattern onto the substrate, and this fairly intuitive thing happens where substrate is not eroded if there's a bedform sitting there because the sediment is isolating the ice from the substrate. And that seems pretty intuitive and obvious, but it's at this core of this really important feedback that occurs where so sediment is produced in these locations where the ice can touch the substrate, and immediately it moves down into the immediately formed down flow, and so that's a huge topographic amplification feedback because the shelter, the feature that's sheltering, stays there. It's continuously supplied with eroded sediment, stays there, and the part that's exposed to the ice and being eroded, that continues to erode even more and more and more. So this acts as an amplification feedback that can create topography from seemingly just subtle variations in the initial till depth. And a lot of controversy, I think, in this subglacial bedform world has been revolving around whether there's this huge profound difference between erosional and depositional bedforms. And these simulations seem to suggest that they're just basically part of a continuum. And so the continuum, you can think about it, very common in other geomorphological situations where you have this continuum sediment availability, substrate erodibility, obviously your driving force, flow speed, and how these really robust features, presence, absence of sediment, these very robust features and and mechanisms interact with each other to control the development of the landscape. And so we can just, here I'll just look at a few simulations here. The top simulation, this is one where the substrate is not very erodible. So basically you get a drumlin field, much like in example number, or box number 3. And then this one here is where the substrate has is more erodible. And the red is the surface. And so you can see these little things on top. These are actually drumlins that are forming these caps on top of the substrate. And I was talking about this mechanism here, this feedback mechanism. They're sheltering the surface and promoting topographic amplification. In this last example here, this is the extreme example where this landscape is almost entirely substrate, and the topography is there's little tiny skiffs of till on the very tops of these features that's helping to maintain them, but the landscape is essentially completely erosional, and yeah, so that's how the results that we've come up with this model. And if you want any more details, we have a paper in GRL that goes into the first 3 boxes. It doesn't go into the erodible stuff yet. And I'm going to have some copies of that ready to go. And also, if you want the full model code to make any of these simulations, it is available on GitHub, ready for people to fork and do whatever they wish to do with it. Thanks very much.